Hey, welcome back. Tonight, we're going to drift back to a place that's been talked about for more than 2,000 years and still feels half real, half dream. Picture central Italy before marble forums, before crowds, before the word Rome meant anything to anyone outside a few valleys. The air is cool. The sky is wide and dark. And below it, the land is quieter than you'd expect, with only the steady, patient sounds that existed long before cities did. Insects in the grass, a dog's distant bark, the soft clink of a goat bell, the hush of water moving in the dark. If you're listening with your eyes closed, let your mind settle near a river. Not a dramatic river with roaring waterfalls. Not a river that announces itself from miles away. This one is broad, slow, and muddy in places, turning through low ground and reed beds. In later centuries, it will be crowded with bridges and stone embankments, but right now it feels untamed. It has a long journey behind it, coming down from the Apennines and winding toward the sea, a run of roughly 400 kilometers from source to coast. Far downstream, it will empty into the Tyrrhenian Sea near Ostia. This river is the Tiber, and for a very long time, the Tiber is not just a piece of geography. It is a boundary, a roadway, a source of water, a threat when it floods, and a kind of quiet promise. If you can control the crossing points, you can control who moves, who trades, and who gets rich. Now, step back from the water and look around. The ground is not one smooth plain. It rises into a small cluster of hills, not mountains, not even especially tall, just enough to lift you above the marsh and give you a view. Hilltops are dry. Hilltops are defensible. Hilltops let you see trouble before it arrives. And in a world where trouble is often a few hours away, that matters. You don't see a city yet. You see patches of human life. A few huts, smoke drifting upward. Maybe a small pen for animals. A footpath pressed into the soil, where people have walked the same route again and again. And that's important because the story of Rome's beginning, whether you tell it as myth or as archaeology or as something in between, starts with one simple reality. Rome began as ordinary. Before it became a symbol, it was a place where people tried to stay warm, keep food stored, protect their children, and make it through another winter. That's the mood we're going for tonight. Not the Rome of triumphal arches, but the Rome that is still deciding whether it will survive. And here's the question that later Romans couldn't stop asking, the question that becomes almost a national obsession. How does a small settlement by a river become Rome? Because Rome wasn't just a city, it became an idea, an argument about power, order, law, faith, and destiny. People wrote poems about it, histories about it, speeches about it. They fought wars to defend it, and they fought wars to claim it. And when they looked back toward the beginning, they wanted the beginning to be worthy of everything that came after. So they told stories. Some of those stories are beautiful, some are brutal, some feel like they were designed to teach lessons more than to record events. And some have roots that seem to reach down into real places and real practices, down into the hills, the paths, and the river crossings that existed long before any grand narrative was wrapped around them. We'll treat the founding of Rome as two connected things. First, the founding as Romans love to tell it, the mythic origin story, centered on Romulus and Remus, a tale preserved and shaped by Roman and Greek writers who were looking back across centuries. Second, the founding as modern historians and archaeologists try to understand it, the slow, early growth of settlement in Latium, central Italy, where villages on hills gradually became something larger, linked by trade routes and rivalries with neighboring peoples. Those two versions don't have to fight each other. In fact, they help each other. The myth tells you what Romans wanted to believe about themselves. The archaeology tells you what people probably had to do, day by day, to make any settlement last. And when you lay them side by side, you start to see why this particular place, these hills by this river, had the potential to become something more than a cluster of huts. To get oriented, let's name the land itself. The region is Latium, the old Latin countryside. It's not a single nation with borders and flags. It's a patchwork of communities, families, clans, villages, who share a language family and certain customs, but who can also clash over pasture, water, and honor. And beyond them are other peoples with their own traditions and power. Sabines in the hills, Etruscans to the north, and many smaller communities scattered through central Italy. This matters because early Rome is not born in isolation. It grows in a crowded neighborhood. And neighborhoods shape you. In a place like this, the earliest form of politics isn't speeches in a Senate house. It's alliances, marriage ties, feuds, gifts, raids. The careful watching of who controls which ridgeline, which spring, which stretch of riverbank. It's the quiet calculation of risk. How far can you push your neighbor before they push back? If you listen closely, you can almost hear the early world of Rome as a constant low hum of negotiation and threat. And still, for all that tension, there is also routine. Imagine waking before sunrise, in a hut made from wood posts and woven walls, plastered with mud, roofed with straw or reeds. The floor is packed earth. Your body knows the cold. Your hands know work. The first light brings the smell of damp grass and smoke, because someone's fire is already alive. You step outside and the landscape is simple but not empty. Animals to tend, fields to check, water to carry. There is no sense yet of being part of Rome. You belong to your household, your kin, your hill, your little community. And yet, even here, certain places pull people together. A reliable crossing over the river, a market day, a seasonal festival, a sacred grove, a shared boundary stone that everyone in the area agrees not to move, because moving it would invite conflict, and maybe invite the gods' anger too. This is one of the reasons Rome's founding story is so tied to ritual. Romans later on believed that boundaries mattered, that the line around a city mattered, that the proper way to mark that line mattered. They believed that a place was not truly safe until it was claimed and named and protected by both people and gods. When later writers describe the founding, they talk about reading signs in the sky and about the act of drawing a boundary that isn't just practical, but sacred. That might sound distant to us, but it's built on something basic. When you live close to danger, you take the idea of protection seriously, and you turn it into ceremony. Now, one more layer before we truly begin the tale. Rome's foundation date, as tradition repeats it, is April 21st, 753 BCE. That specific day is tied to later calculations made long after the earliest settlement began. It's a birthday chosen for the city, not a camera snapshot of a single moment. That doesn't mean nothing happened before that day. It doesn't mean a city sprang out of the ground all at once. It means that Romans, looking backward, chose a clean marker, something you can celebrate, something you can put on a calendar. And humans love birthdays, especially for things that outgrow them. What archaeology suggests is that parts of the Palatine Hill, one of the hills most closely tied to the Romulus story, were occupied earlier than the traditional founding date, with evidence for habitation reaching back into the 10th and 9th centuries BCE. So you can think of the story like this. The land had people first, then the people had stories, then the stories hardened into an official founding. And then, once Rome became powerful, the founding stories became powerful too. Because a strong city wants a strong origin. It wants its beginning to feel inevitable. It wants to believe it was meant to be. That's why the Romans didn't settle for a simple statement like, some families built huts near a river crossing. That's true, but it's not satisfying. It doesn't match the scale of what Rome became. So instead, Rome gave itself a founder with a name that sounds like the city. It gave itself a dramatic birth, full of danger and rescue. It gave itself conflict, because Romans understood conflict. And it gave itself a lesson, that the city is bigger than any one person, even bigger than family. Before we meet the famous names, before the wolf, the twins, the signs in the sky, let's sit in the landscape a little longer, because Rome's beginning is not just a story about people. It's a story about a location that keeps offering advantages, the way a good campsite keeps calling someone back. Close your eyes and see the river again. Think about travel in this era. There are no paved roads cutting straight lines. There are tracks through brush and pasture. There are ridges and valleys and places that turn muddy when it rains. In that kind of world, a river can be both a barrier and a guide. If you can find a dependable place to cross it, especially a place shallow enough to ford or narrow enough to bridge in the future, you control movement. And if you control movement, you can protect it, tax it, or threaten it. This is where trade quietly enters the story. One of the key goods that moves through ancient Italy is salt. Salt keeps food from spoiling. Salt keeps animals healthy. Salt is survival. And there are good reasons to think that control of routes connected to the salt trade helped make this river crossing valuable, long before Rome had stone streets or a navy. Again, that's not a myth. That's a practical reason a settlement here could grow. And yet, a practical reason doesn't satisfy the human need for meaning. A myth does. So tonight, we're going to let both exist at once, the practical and the poetic. We'll let the hills be real hills, and we'll let them carry legend. We'll let the river be a real river, and we'll let it carry a basket. Because what makes Rome's founding story so enduring is that it's built from human instincts that don't change much. The instinct to explain where you came from. The instinct to turn hardship into meaning. The instinct to claim that your people are not an accident. If you were born in a small, vulnerable community, surrounded by rivals, with no guarantee that your grandchildren will still live on this land, you might look for a story that makes you feel protected, chosen, anchored. And the Romans did. They built an origin that ties them to kings, to heroes, and to the gods themselves. They linked their beginning to the wider mythic world of the Mediterranean, reaching back toward Troy through the story of Aeneas, and then carried that thread forward through generations down into the Latin hills. But we're not going to rush there tonight. We start in the hush before the story becomes loud. We start with the sense of a place waiting to be named. So imagine you're walking along a low path near the river, where the ground is damp underfoot. The reeds brush your legs. The air smells faintly of wet soil. Somewhere in the dark, an animal moves and then goes still, listening. Up on the hills, there are small points of firelight. Each one is a household. Each one is a small circle of warmth and safety, surrounded by night. And above all of it is the sky, clear enough that you can see the stars. In this world, the sky isn't just decoration. It's a calendar. It's a guide. And for people who believed in signs, it was also a message. That belief matters for Rome's founding story, because the story is filled with decisions that are framed as choices approved or denied by the gods, birds in flight, thunder in the distance, a feeling that the universe has an opinion. That might sound strange now, but it made sense then, because when you don't control much, you look for signs that someone does. And if you can read those signs, you can claim authority. Authority is one of the central themes of Rome's founding, and it begins with a simple question: who gets to decide? Who decides where to build? Who decides who belongs? Who decides where the boundary is? Who decides who rules? Every founding story is an answer to those questions. And Rome's answer, in its most famous version, is not gentle. It says that a city is born from conflict, and that the conflict matters. Not because violence is admirable, but because Romans believed that order is expensive, that laws are expensive, that security is expensive, that a community can't be held together with good intentions alone. You can feel that mindset in the way Romans treated their own past, even when it was legendary. They didn't paint the beginning as perfect. They painted it as hard, as risky, as costly. And that, oddly enough, can feel honest. Because the earliest Rome, whatever exact year you choose, whatever story you prefer, would have been hard. Hard work, hard choices, hard weather, hard neighbors. Now let's gently set up the cast of this long story, without stepping fully onto the stage yet. There will be heroes in the Roman telling. There will be kings. There will be gods, or at least the sense of gods. There will be a mother caught in someone else's power struggle. There will be two brothers, and a decision that changes everything. And there will also be quieter characters that don't always get the spotlight. Shepherds, farmers, traders, families, and the countless ordinary people who make any founding real by simply staying. Because a city isn't founded only by a single dramatic moment. A city is founded every morning when someone wakes up and chooses to keep living there. So as we begin, I want you to keep one image in your mind. A line in the soil. Not yet drawn, not yet defended, not yet sacred. Just a possibility. A place where a boundary could be made. A place where a cluster of huts could become a community. A place where the name Rome could someday mean something. We'll stay close to the earth, close to the river, close to the hills. We'll watch the story take shape the way it would have felt to the people who lived it, or who believed they lived it. And as you settle in, let the modern world fade back a little. Let your breathing slow. The river is still there, moving quietly through the dark. The hills are still there, holding small pockets of firelight. And the beginning of Rome is waiting, just beyond the edge of the fire. Settle back into the landscape for a while longer, because before there is a name like Rome, there is a set of pressures that shape life here, the way wind shapes a shoreline. Central Italy, in this early age, is not a blank space waiting for a city to appear. It is already lived in. It is already watched. It is already divided into familiar territories, even if no one draws them on a map. If you could float above the land for a moment, you would see why people keep coming to the same places. You would see water first. Streams running down from the Apennines, springs tucked into shaded slopes, small rivers feeding into larger ones. And then the Tiber itself, slow and wide, moving like a dark ribbon through low ground. You would also see the way the land rises and falls, hills that give you a view, valleys that collect fog, marshy patches that can swallow a footstep when the season is wet. In summer, the air can feel dusty and sharp. In winter, it can feel raw, with damp cold that gets into wood and cloth. And everywhere, you would see the simple logic of early settlement. People don't choose a home site because it looks beautiful from a distance. They choose it because it helps them live. A hilltop keeps you above flooding. A slope gives you drainage. A nearby spring saves you hours of hauling water. A patch of good soil means you can plant and hope. A grove means shade, fuel, and a place that feels set apart. And a river crossing means you can meet strangers on your own terms. All of those things exist in the area that will become Rome. That's the quiet foundation beneath every later story. Now imagine the people who live in this neighborhood. They are not yet Romans. They are households and clans and villages, tied together by kinship and shared habits. They speak related tongues. They trade. They marry across communities. They also fight, sometimes quickly, sometimes for years. If you listen to later Roman writers, you'll hear names for these groups, names that sound clean and distinct. Latins, Sabines, Etruscans. Those labels are useful, but they can make the world feel more organized than it really was. On the ground, life is often smaller and messier. A person might define themselves by their hill, their family, their god, their patron, their cattle, their neighbors, and their grudges, all at once. Still, the broader groups matter because they tell you what kind of pressure sits around the early settlement sites. Start with the Latins. Latium is a region of low hills and plains, with villages scattered across ridges and valleys. The Latins are not a single united nation here. They are a related set of communities, linked by language and some shared customs, but still independent enough to compete. Their lives are built around a few core tasks: keeping animals alive, planting grains and legumes, harvesting at the right moment, storing food so it lasts, protecting their small wealth from theft. In a world like this, your wealth is not abstract. It is visible. It is sheep. It is goats. It is cattle. It is jars of grain. It is bronze tools. It is a strong fence and a steady fire. And because wealth is visible, it is tempting, it can be taken. That creates a constant tension, like a low vibration under daily life. You wake up and you work, and in the back of your mind you remember that somewhere beyond the next ridge, there are other people who might look at your cattle and think, we could use those. Now, bring in the Sabines. The Sabines are often associated with the hill country to the northeast of the later city, with harder terrain and strong traditions. In later Roman memory, the Sabines become both rival and kin, and other that also becomes part of the self. But before any blending, what matters is proximity. The Sabine Hills are close enough that movement between regions is not rare. People travel for trade and for marriage. People also travel for raids. In a world where land is claimed by use and defended by force, hill people and valley people can clash over pasture, water, and boundaries that are understood more by custom than by stone markers. There is a reason Roman founding stories are filled with conflict and merging. It reflects how communities actually grow in tight spaces, by pushing, pulling, and sometimes joining. Then, to the north, there are the Etruscans. In later centuries, the Etruscans are remembered as wealthy, organized, and skilled builders, traders, and people with strong city traditions. Their towns and cities to the north are closer to a true urban style earlier than many Latin communities. From the point of view of a small settlement near the Tiber, the Etruscans represent both opportunity and danger. Opportunity, because trade with a richer neighbor can bring tools, ideas, and status. Danger, because a richer neighbor can also bring armies and demands. And beyond those three labels are many other communities. Small towns, hill forts, coastal settlements, and wandering groups whose names do not survive as neatly. This is why central Italy feels like a pressure cooker. It is a patchwork of peoples in a limited space, with enough resources to support life, but not enough peace to make life easy. Now, step down from the big picture and let the ground-level reality return. Picture a day in late spring. The air is mild in the morning, still cool enough that you like the feel of a cloak around your shoulders. The sun climbs, and the valley warms. You hear work before you see it. A stone grinding grain. A child calling. A goat bleating. An axe biting into wood. In the early Iron Age, the Iron Age label can feel dramatic, but many tools are still bronze, and iron is not yet a cheap, everywhere metal. A good blade matters. A strong spearhead matters. A durable plow point matters. When you own one, you guard it. And when you don't, you borrow, trade, or you live without. Homes are simple and practical. Walls of wattle and mud. Roofs of thatch. A central hearth. Storage jars. Hides for warmth. The point is not comfort. The point is survival. People here live close to the rhythms of season and weather. In summer, the heat can dry the land and shrink streams. In winter, rains can turn paths to mud and make the river swell. Flooding is not an occasional surprise. It is part of the Tiber's character. In low ground, flooding can spread into marshy areas, leaving behind standing water that brings insects and sickness. So, if you have a choice, you do not build your sleeping place in the floodplain. You build up. You build on a hill. Now consider why that matters for Rome. The hills near the Tiber are not just pretty shapes. They are safe ground in a landscape that can turn dangerous quickly. A hill also gives you warning. If a rival group is moving toward your pasture, you can see dust and movement. If strangers are approaching the river crossing, you can watch them. If the river is rising too fast, you can see the spread of water and move animals sooner. A hill is a small advantage that becomes a big advantage when repeated day after day. That's one reason the early settlement pattern in the Rome area makes sense. People cluster on hilltops. But hilltops alone do not create a city. Cities grow when separate clusters begin to share space. when paths between hills become regular, when trade becomes dependable, when people start thinking of a wider area as ours, not just mine. That shift can happen slowly, so slowly that no one living through it feels a single turning point. It can also happen because of pressure. Pressure from rivals, pressure from trade, pressure from population, pressure from a need for rules. Imagine that you live on one hill and your cousin lives on another. At first, you might treat them as another community, friendly but separate. Then, maybe you marry across hills. Then, you share a sacred spot between you. Then, you begin to meet at a market near the river. Then, when outsiders threaten, you fight together. At some point, the difference between two hills and one community begins to blur. That blurring is one of the most important parts of Rome's real beginning. Not a single day, not a single founder, but a slow tightening of connections. Now, bring in trade again, because trade does something powerful. It creates regular meetings with strangers. It creates habits. It creates expectations. And it creates disputes that need solutions. When people pass through your area, you have options. You can ignore them. You can welcome them. You can rob them. You can tax them. You can protect them. Each choice has consequences. Robbing travelers might bring quick gain, but it also creates enemies and fear. Protecting travelers might bring fewer immediate goods, but it creates reputation and steady exchange. A settlement near a crossing point is always making those choices, whether it thinks of them as policy or not. And that is how early politics can begin, not with speeches, but with repeated decisions about strangers. Now, consider what people fear. They fear hunger. They fear winter. They fear disease. They fear raids. They fear losing a child. They fear being pushed off land their family has used for generations. Because they fear those things, they build habits that look, from a distance, like tradition. They keep track of seasons with festivals. They mark sacred places. They make promises to gods. They follow rules about boundary stones and oaths. They punish people who break those rules, because broken rules can unravel a fragile peace. This is the soil where later Roman ideas about law and ritual grow. Later, Rome will become famous for law, for clear categories, for rules written down. But before anything is written, rules exist as memory. Everyone remembers what happened the last time someone crossed a boundary. Everyone remembers which family is quick to fight. Everyone remembers which grove is sacred. Everyone remembers which oath was broken. Now, let's talk about the sense of crowdedness, because it's easy to underestimate how packed this world can feel, even with a relatively small population. The land is not empty. Even if there are wide spaces between villages, those spaces are used. They are pasture. They are hunting ground. They are routes. They are contested. And when routes matter, friction increases. The Tiber, again, is central. It connects inland communities to the sea. It gives access to fish, reeds, water, and transport. It also creates choke points, places where travelers must slow down and make choices. Where there is a choke point, there is power. And where there is power, there is competition. Now let your mind drift to the sound of a distant group approaching. Not an army in shining armor. A small band. Maybe traders with pack animals. Maybe a herding group moving between seasonal pastures. Maybe young men from a neighboring hill testing boundaries. You hear them first as a difference in the soundscape. More footsteps. More voices. A sharper edge of movement. The dogs react. Someone stands and watches. In a world like this, you learn to read human movement the way you read weather. You learn to tell the difference between a harmless visit and a dangerous one. And you learn that strength matters, even if you prefer peace. That is another reason the founding story of Rome, as later told, leans into toughness. Not because early people loved violence, because early people could not afford weakness. Even a small settlement needs the ability to defend itself. That means young men trained to fight. It means leaders who can organize. It means shared decisions about when to retaliate and when to negotiate. Those decisions shape identity. A community that is constantly raided begins to value discipline. A community that controls a crossing begins to value order. A community that absorbs outsiders begins to value flexibility. Rome, in later memory, will claim all three. But for now, we're still in the stage where those traits are forming. Now, consider the neighbors again, but in a more personal way. The Latins, on the low ground and gentle hills, live in a world where farming and herding share the same day. The Sabines, in hill country, may have different habits and dialects, and a strong sense of their own customs. The Etruscans, to the north, are close enough that their goods, their styles, and their influence can filter down the river. To live in the Rome area is to live at the meeting point of those worlds. Meeting points can be unstable. They can also be rich. A place where cultures meet is a place where new practices appear. New tools, new rituals, new ways of organizing power. This is why the future Rome will look, even in its earliest centuries, like a blended thing. Not purely Latin, not purely Sabine, not purely Etruscan, but something that borrows and adapts. Now, let's slow down and imagine how a person in this era understands belonging. Belonging is not citizenship yet. It's not papers. It's not a vote. Belonging is protection. Who will stand with you in a fight? Who will share grain if your crop fails? Who will marry your child and bind families together? Who will help rebuild if fire takes your hut? A settlement that can offer those answers becomes attractive. It draws people. It gains strength. And it gains something else, a reputation. Reputation matters as much as weapons. If travelers believe you are fair, they come. If rivals believe you are strong, they think twice. If nearby communities believe you keep oaths, they make alliances. You can feel how, over time, a place like the Tiber Hills could become more than a cluster of huts. Now, there's one more ingredient in this pressure cooker, the idea of sacred space. Even in simple communities, certain places carry weight. A grove, a spring, a rock outcrop, a boundary line, a hilltop where ancestors are buried. Sacred space does two things at once. It connects a community to the unseen, and it connects a community to itself. If everyone agrees a place is sacred, everyone has a reason to meet there. To celebrate, to mourn, to negotiate, to swear. In that sense, religion is not separate from society, it is part of the glue. Later Rome will formalize this idea with priests, calendars, and official rituals. But the root of it is older, the need for shared meaning, shared rules, and shared fear. Now, take a slow breath and picture the hills again. Not as monuments, not as tourist sites, as practical high ground, as places where smoke rises in thin lines, as places where children chase each other in dust, as places where older people sit and remember seasons, as places where young people test their strength. Somewhere in this landscape, decisions are being made. Maybe a family chooses to move closer to the river crossing because trade is growing. Maybe two hills agree to share a festival. Maybe a small band of outsiders arrives and asks for a place to settle, offering labor or alliance. Maybe a conflict breaks out over cattle, and a leader emerges because someone has to speak, someone has to decide. These are the quiet steps that make a future city possible. So when you hear later legends about a founder drawing a line in the soil, remember that the line is also a symbol for something much slower. The slow drawing of community boundaries. The slow building of shared rules. The slow acceptance that we is bigger than me. This is the world that comes before the famous names. A world of Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, and countless smaller groups. A world shaped by water and hills. A world shaped by trade and fear. A world where a settlement can grow if it is smart, strong, and lucky. And as you rest in that world, you can feel how the founding of Rome is not just a story about one day. It is a story about a place that keeps pulling people back because it offers just enough advantage to be worth the risk. The river keeps moving. The hills keep watching. And in the crowded heart of central Italy, a name is beginning to form, even if no one can hear it yet. There is a particular kind of silence that lives under old cities. It is not the silence of empty wilderness. It is the silence of things buried and pressed down, of footsteps stacked on footsteps, of fires layered over older fires, of walls built on top of earlier walls, until the ground becomes a deep book with pages stuck together. Rome is like that. When you stand on the stone pavements of the later city, it is easy to feel that everything began with stone. Columns, arches, blocks of tuff and travertine. A place that looks as if it was always meant to last. But if you could peel back time the way you peel back soil, the first Rome looks different. It looks like earth. It looks like wood. It looks like thatch. It looks like the humble logic of people who needed a dry place to sleep. Archaeology is how we glimpse that first Rome, because the earliest written sources we have are not eyewitness diaries from the beginning. They are later voices, remembering and shaping. The ground, however, can keep memories of its own, faint traces that survive precisely because they were not meant to be remembered. So let's slow down and talk about what archaeology can tell us about Rome's earliest years. And, just as importantly, what it can't. Imagine a spade cutting into soil on one of the hills. At first, the earth looks ordinary. Then the color shifts slightly. A darker patch, a line of stones, a shallow groove. And the archaeologist's attention sharpens, because these tiny differences are often the only way the past announces itself. The earliest material traces of Rome are not grand walls. They are small, practical marks. Post holes where wooden supports once stood. Holes for fence stakes. Impressions in the soil where a hut wall sat. Ash and charcoal from cooking fires. Broken pottery, because pottery breaks every day. Animal bones, because people ate. Graves, because people died. If you're used to thinking of history as something written down, this can feel unsatisfying at first. Post holes do not tell stories in sentences. But they do tell stories. They tell you where people lived. They tell you how big a home was. They tell you whether homes were rebuilt again and again in the same place. They tell you whether a hilltop was used for a season or for generations. They tell you whether a valley was avoided or later drained and claimed. And when you gather many small traces together, you can begin to see patterns. One of the most important patterns is this. Parts of the Palatine Hill show evidence of consistent occupation earlier than the traditional founding date that Romans celebrated. Later tradition places Romulus on the Palatine, and archaeologists have found traces of early hut foundations on the hill that match what early Latin huts likely looked like. Simple structures from the early Iron Age, with thatch roofs and walls made from woven material coated with mud. In several areas, the evidence points to habitation beginning as early as the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, with hut settlements lasting into the 7th century BCE. This doesn't prove that Romulus was a historian. It shows that the place Romulus was later linked to was genuinely old, genuinely used, genuinely capable of supporting settlement long before Rome's later monuments. So archaeology can support the idea that there was an early community on the Palatine. What archaeology cannot do is confirm a single founder's name. Wood does not preserve names. Ash does not preserve speeches. A post hole does not tell you whether a leader was loved or feared. That's one of the first limits to keep in mind. Now let's talk about how archaeologists date these traces, because old is not enough. In a city like Rome, centuries can blur together. Dating often comes from layers. A later layer sits on top of an earlier one, the way one season's fallen leaves sit on last year's. A hut floor might sit below a later stone foundation. A burial might be cut into soil, then covered over and forgotten. A drain might slice through older deposits. When archaeologists excavate carefully, they record these relationships. They look at the order of layers, and they look at what objects are found inside each layer. Pottery is especially useful. Pottery styles change over time, and different communities make pottery in distinct ways. So when pottery fragments are found in a layer, they can help narrow the date range. Sometimes there is charcoal from a fire, and radiocarbon dating can help. Sometimes there are imported objects that tie a layer to trade networks that we can date from other regions. In Rome's case, there is also a challenge. The city has been built, torn down, rebuilt, and dug up for thousands of years. Later construction can disturb earlier layers, mixing things that were never originally together. That means archaeology can be powerful, but it also demands caution. Now, move your attention from the Palatine to the valley that will become the Roman Forum. In the later city, this valley is a grand public space: temples, meeting places, memorials, the heart of Roman civic life. In its earliest phase, the valley was far less polished. Archaeological work suggests that parts of the future Forum area were once used as a burial ground in the early Iron Age, before the area shifted toward public use as the community changed and the land became more valuable. That detail matters. It suggests a transformation. It suggests that the community's relationship to space changed, of later on, a space for the living to gather. This kind of change does not happen without meaning. Turning a burial area into a communal space can signal growing population, growing organization, and new ideas about where the sacred and the public should be. But again, archaeology gives us the outline, not the full explanation. We can see that burials existed. We can see that they stopped. We can see new activity. We cannot hear the debates that may have happened. We cannot read the fears or beliefs that guided the choice. We can only infer carefully. Now, if the valley was once wet and marshy, another practical question follows. How did it become usable? Later tradition credits early rulers with major drainage works, including the beginnings of the Cloaca Maxima, the massive drainage system associated with the Forum's transformation. Many scholars treat its earliest form as drainage first, then gradually enclosed and expanded as the settlement grew and the valley's space became more precious. You don't have to picture a single dramatic construction day. It is more natural to picture a gradual engineering response to a stubborn problem. When a valley is wet, it limits UC's valuable. When the valley becomes valuable, people invest effort into controlling water. That is one of the most basic stories a city can tell, the story of claiming land by managing nature. And that story is written, in Rome, in layers of earth and stone. Now, let's talk about one of the most famous early finds in the Forum area, the dark paving, known as the lapis niger. Today, it is remembered as a black stone surface that covers a spot later Romans already regarded as ancient and powerful. Underneath the later surface, archaeologists found an older shrine area and an archaic inscription in early Latin, often dated around the late 7th to mid-6th century BCE. The inscription is fragmentary and difficult to interpret, but it includes words associated with kingship and sacred law, which hints at early political and religious structures. Notice what that gives us. It gives us writing. Not the full story of the beginning, but a voice, a rule, a warning, a reminder that early Rome was already developing formal sacred spaces and not give us is a neat founding tale. It does not say, "Here is the day the city began." It does not name Romulus. It does not explain every step between hut villages and public sanctuaries. It is a peace. A strong peace. But still a peace. Nearby, there are other archaic sacred areas connected to Rome's earliest civic space, including an early sanctuary precinct associated with Vulcan and the old assembly area near the heart of the settlement. All of this is why archaeology can help you feel the difference between legend as a story and legend as a memory of place. Even if the specific events are shaped by later telling, the places can still carry true antiquity. Now, there is another important category of evidence: cemeteries and graves. We tend to think of graves as private grief, and they are. But graves are also public values. They show what kinds of objects people think matter enough to accompany the dead. They show whether weapons are common in burials, suggesting a warrior identity. They show differences in wealth. They show connections if certain styles or materials match those found elsewhere. When burials in the forum area ceased, other burial grounds, including those associated with the Esquiline area, become significant for understanding Rome's growth outward. As the settlement expanded, burial practices and grave goods in some periods suggest a community developing new layers of status and influence. Again, archaeology can show us change. It can show a community that is becoming more complex. It can show new levels of wealth. It can show a stronger warrior class. But it cannot tell us the names of the people who felt these changes in their bones. Now we should pause for a moment on a question that sounds simple but isn't. When does a village become a city? People often want to switch. A date. A moment. But settlement growth is U-minute, does night become day. The world changes slowly, then suddenly you look up and realize it is different. Rome's earliest growth likely involved separate hilltop communities that gradually developed stronger connections, paths becoming regular routes, shared spaces forming, and certain valleys being transformed from wetland or burial ground into communal areas. This is why you can find early traces in more than one place. It is not only one hill. It is not only one pit in the ground. It is a region of activity tightening into a single identity. Now let's talk about the ways archaeology can mislead if we're not careful. First, survival is unfair. Stone survives better than wood. A wall's foundation might remain, but the house built on it may be gone. A fired clay pot survives, but a basket does not. A bronze pin survives, but a wool cloak does not. That means the material record is biased towards certain parts of life. If you only look at what survives, you might imagine a world more focused on pottery than it really was. You might imagine fewer textiles, fewer wooden tools, fewer everyday items. But those things existed. They just vanished. Second, later building activity disturbs earlier layers. Rome has been continuously occupied. People dug foundations. They dug drains. They quarried stone. They reused older material. They leveled ground. Every one of those actions can cut through earlier deposits. That means the earliest evidence is sometimes patchy. You might find a hut trace on one part of a hill and nothing nearby, not because nothing was there, but because later activity erased it. Third, interpretation changes. Archaeologists do not simply find facts. They find traces, and then they argue carefully about what those traces mean. Is that dark soil patch a hearth? Or is it the remains of a later disturbance? Is that line of stones a wall footing? Or is it a natural formation used later as a boundary? Different scholars can disagree, especially when evidence is fragmentary. This is not a weakness of archaeology. It is honesty. It is the discipline refusing to pretend that uncertainty is certainty. And in the story of Rome's beginnings, uncertainty appears often. Now, there is another limit. Archaeology can show you the physical growth of a community, but it struggles to show you inner life. It is hard to dig up fear. It is hard to dig up loyalty. It is hard to dig up the feeling of standing at a boundary and deciding who belongs. Those things matter enormously in Rome's founding legends. The legends are full of emotion because humans remember emotion. But archaeology's language is different. It speaks in traces, in layers, in patterns. So how do we hold both together? One way is to treat the legends as reflections. Not reflections of exact events, but reflections of themes that fit the early world. A settlement that grows at a crossroads would worry about outsiders. A settlement surrounded by rivals would value toughness. A settlement formed from multiple groups would tell stories about merging. A settlement that turns wet ground into civic space would tell stories about leaders with the will to build. Archaeology can support those broad shapes, even when it cannot confirm the named characters. And this is where Rome becomes especially fascinating. Because later, Romans did not only tell stories about their beginning, they anchored those stories in specific places. A certain corner of the Palatine associated with a founder's hut. A certain sacred spot in the Forum covered and protected. A certain line of hills that later tradition counted and named. That habit, tying story to landscape, can preserve a memory of where old Rome truly was, even if the details are embroidered. Modern visitors still feel this without realizing it. They walk the Palatine and sense that it is older than the monuments. They stand near the Forum and feel the ground shift under layers. They look at the river and understand, instinctively, why people settled near it. So what can archaeology tell us? It can show that the Palatine was occupied early, with hut settlements that fit the kind of village life later Romans imagined. It can show that the Forum area had a pre-urban phase, including early burials before becoming a civic center. It can show that archaic sacred and civic spaces existed, including the old shrine beneath the black paving and the nearby sacred precincts associated with early assembly. It can show that water management and drainage were crucial in shaping usable space, with major drains evolving as the settlement grew. And it can show that burial practices and shifting cemeteries reflect a community becoming larger, more structured. It cannot tell us is the clean, simple story later Romans wanted. It cannot tell us the precise day a founder drew the exact words spoken over a sacred line. It cannot tell us whether two brothers truly existed and fought. It cannot, on its own, give us a single origin moment. Instead, it offers something that is, in M, many small beginnings. A beginning that spreads across hills. A beginning that slowly claims a valley. A beginning that becomes a shared identity only after Countelcedal. Rome's origin feels less like a single spark and more like embers. One fire on one hill. Another fire on another hill. Paths between them. Charrettes. Shared opportunities. And then, gradually, the fires begin to feel like one hearth. The city, before it is stone, is a habit. A habit of gathering. A habit of defending. A habit of trading. A habit of calling a place ours. Soon, we'll follow the way later Romans tried to explain that habit, tying their beginnings to heroic ancestry, to kings, and to the long shadow of Troy. For now, stay with the ground. Stay with the quiet evidence. A post hole. A scatter of pottery. A grave. A sacred spot, protected beneath layers. These are small things. But in a place built from small things, they are the closest we can come to watching the beginning happen. Long before Rome tells its own story, it borrows one. Not because it is weak, but because it wants depth. When later Romans looked back and asked where they came from, the hills and huts of Latium were not enough on their own. Those explained survival. They did not explain destiny. And Romans, especially once they held power, cared deeply about destiny. So they reached outward, across the sea, into the shared memory of the Mediterranean world. They reached to Troy. To understand why, we have to slow the story down and widen it, because the Trojan thread is not a side note. It is the bridge Romans used to connect their local beginnings to a heroic past that everyone in the ancient world already recognized. At the center of this thread stands Aeneas. Aeneas is not a Roman invention. He is already present in Greek epic tradition as a Trojan prince, a warrior, and a survivor. In the aftermath of Troy's destruction, while other heroes fall or fade, Aeneas escapes. That escape is everything. It turns defeat into continuity. It turns loss into migration. And it turns a ruined city into the seed of future ones. In the Roman telling, Aeneas does not wander aimlessly. He is driven by obligation, by duty to the gods, by duty to his family, by duty to a future he cannot yet see. This idea of duty matters, because Romans later saw it as one of their defining traits. By claiming Aeneas as an ancestor, they claimed his values along with his blood. Picture the scene as later poets described it. Troy is burning. The air is thick with smoke. The sounds are confusion and grief. Aeneas lifts his aged father onto his shoulders. He takes his household gods, he gathers his son, and he leaves. Whether or not this scene happened as told is not the point. The point is that Romans believed it was the right kind of beginning. Not a clean victory. Not a triumphant conquest. But endurance. Survival. Carrying the past forward instead of abandoning it. In Roman memory, Aeneas travels for years. He crosses seas. He faces storms, monsters, hostile lands, and tempting delays. Everywhere he goes, he is reminded that he is not finished yet. Eventually, he reaches the coast of Italy. Not the Rome we know, not even Latium at first, but the broader Italian world that already has its own peoples and conflicts. This is where myth begins to touch geography. Aeneas is said to land in the region that will later be associated with Latium. He encounters local rulers. He negotiates, fights, and marries. And through these acts, he does what founding figures are meant to do. He binds worlds together. In Roman tradition, Aeneas establishes Lavinium, named after his wife, Lavinia. Lavinium is not Rome. And that matters. Rome does not claim to be founded directly by a Trojan hero. Instead, it places a generation gap between Troy and itself. This gives Rome time to feel native to Italy while still carrying heroic ancestry. Lavinium becomes a sacred starting point, a place where Trojan gods and Italian land meet, a place where rituals are established and remembered. From Lavinium, the story moves inland. Aeneas's descendants rule a line of kings at Alba Longa, a settlement traditionally placed in the Alban Hills southeast of where Rome will later rise. This royal line is long. It stretches across generations, and its length serves a purpose. It smooths the transition from myth to something that feels more historical. Instead of jumping straight from Troy to Rome, the story takes its time. It creates a dynasty. It lets memory fade slightly. It allows Italian land to shape Trojan blood. Alba Longa, in the tradition, becomes the mother city of Rome. Not in stone, but in lineage. This is where the kings of Alba Longa matter. They are not as famous as Romulus. They do not star in dramatic single scenes. But they perform an important narrative function. They anchor Rome's origin in a long, continuous past. Generations pass. Names repeat. The city endures. By the time the story reaches the last kings of Alba Longa, Troy is no longer a recent memory. It is a distant but honored ancestor. This distance is useful. It allows Rome to say, we are connected to the great heroes of the past, but we are not trapped by them. Now pause and consider why this Trojan connection mattered so much. In the ancient Mediterranean world, stories were a form of status. Greek cities traced themselves to heroes of the Trojan War. Families claimed descent from gods. To lack a heroic origin was to seem small. Rome, rising among older cultures, needed a story that placed it on equal footing. By tying itself to Troy, Rome inserted itself into a mythic conversation that everyone already understood. It also did something clever. Troy, in Greek tradition, is both noble and doomed. By descending from Trojans rather than Greeks, Rome positioned itself as an inheritor, not a rival. Not a usurper of Greek glory, but a continuation of it transformed. This helped Rome later, culturally and politically, as it expanded into the Greek world. The story said, we are not outsiders. We are family. Now, let's return to Italy. Alba Longa, in tradition, stands as a quiet but powerful presence. It is a place of kingship, a place of ritual, a place of continuity, and it is also a place of vulnerability, because dynasties breed conflict. Inheritance invites rivalry, and eventually the smooth line of descent fractures. This fracture comes in the form of two brothers, Numitor and Amulius. Numitor is the rightful king of Alba Longa. Amulius takes power. This is a familiar pattern in ancient stories, not because it is convenient, but because it is common. Succession is dangerous. Power is tempting. Blood ties do not prevent ambition. Amulius removes Numitor from the throne. He then moves to secure his position. Sons can challenge power. Grandsons can challenge power. So Amulius takes steps to end the line. Numitor's sons are killed. His daughter, Rhea Silvia, is forced into the role of a Vestal Virgin. This is not a neutral religious honor. It is a political decision. Vestal virgins are bound to chastity. No children means no heirs. The royal line, Amulius believes, will end quietly. But this is where the story tightens, because Rome's origin is not built on quiet endings. According to tradition, Rhea Silvia becomes pregnant. She claims the god Mars as the father. Whether later Romans believed this literally is less important than what it symbolizes. Mars is not a god of fertility or peace. He is a god of war, strength, and action. By linking Rome's bloodline to Mars, the story frames conflict as part of the city's nature from the very beginning. This union produces twins. And twins are always dangerous in myth. They introduce symmetry. They introduce rivalry. They introduce choice. Amulius reacts the way tyrants often do in stories. He orders the infants killed. But once again, the story resists clean endings. The servants tasked with the deed do not complete it. Instead, the twins are set adrift, placed in a basket, sent into the river. This moment is where the Trojan thread, the Alban kings, and the local Roman landscape finally begin to merge. The river is no longer a backdrop. It becomes an actor. The Tiber carries the children, not to death, but to survival. This is not yet the founding of Rome, but it is the narrowing of the story. The long arc from Troy has now funneled into two lives, two infants, two possible futures. Everything that follows will grow out of this point. The heroic past has arrived at the riverbank, and from here on the story will move quickly. Because Rome's beginning, once it takes shape, does not linger. It collides, it divides, and it forces a choice. For now, stay with a sense of inheritance. Aeneas carried Troy on his shoulders. Generations carried that memory inland, And now, on the edge of the Tiber, that memory waits to be claimed by something new. The river moves. The basket drifts. And the long story of Rome has reached the place where myth and landscape can no longer be separated. The river does not announce its decision. It moves as it always has. Slow in places, swift in others, carrying silt, branches, and the small accidents of human life. Somewhere along its banks, the basket runs aground. Not in the open water. Not swept out to sea. But caught where roots grip the mud and reeds soften the current. This detail matters because Rome's story is not about being saved by spectacle. It is about being saved by margins, by edges, by in-between spaces where danger eases just enough for survival. The twins are still infants. They cannot choose. They cannot understand. They exist entirely at the mercy of chance, of people they have never met, and of a landscape that has already shaped their fate once by sparing them. In later retellings, the basket comes to rest near the foot of a hill, the Palatine, a place that will one day be crowded with palaces, but is now a slope of brush and trees above the river's reach. The story could end here. Exposure was meant to end it. In the ancient world, abandonment is not rare. It is brutal, but it is familiar. Infants are left when families cannot support them, when politics demands it, when fear overrides mercy. What makes Rome's origin distinctive is not that children were exposed. It is that they survived. According to tradition, the first living creature to find them is not human. It is a she-wolf. This image has become so famous that it is easy to forget how strange it is. Wolves are not gentle animals in the imagination of early Italy. They are dangerous. They hunt livestock. They threaten settlements. They live just beyond the edge of control. And yet, in this story, the wolf does not kill. She nurses. She protects. She keeps the children alive long enough for something else to happen. Later, Roman writers do not all tell this moment the same way. Some emphasize the animal itself. Others suggest that the word later used for wolf may also hint at a human woman living on society's margins. The ambiguity lingers. That ambiguity is important, because Rome's beginning is always balanced between the wild and the human, between nature that threatens and nature that sustains, between abandonment and adoption. Eventually, the twins are discovered by a shepherd. His name, in tradition, is Faustulus. He is not a king. He is not a hero. He is a working man, tending flocks on land that sits between river and hill. Faustulus does what the powerful did not. He chooses to keep the children. He brings them into his household. His wife raises them as her own. And in doing so, the story shifts again. Rome's founders are not raised in a palace. They are raised in a shepherd's home. They learn the rhythms of work, the language of animals, the practical knowledge of land and weather. They grow up among people who survive by attention, not by command. This matters because it gives Rome a second parentage. One line runs upward, toward gods and kings. The other runs outward, toward labor and common life. The twins are named Romulus and Remus. The names matter less here than what they represent. A pair bound together by birth, shaped together by experience, and destined to stand on opposite sides of a decision. As children, they grow strong. As adolescents, they grow bold. Later tradition describes them as natural leaders, quick to act, quick to defend, unwilling to accept insult. They do not stay close to home. They roam. They hunt. They clash with other bands of young men who live by herding and raiding. This world is not orderly. It is competitive. Young men prove themselves through strength and loyalty. Disputes over cattle, land, and honor are common. Authority is earned in action. Romulus and Remus thrive in this environment. They are respected. They gather followers. And without knowing it, they begin to behave like leaders. The land around them, hills, valleys, riverbanks, becomes a testing ground. Each conflict teaches them where power comes from. Each victory teaches them that people will follow those who act decisively. Eventually, the past catches up with them. In one version of the tradition, Remus is captured during a clash with rival herders and taken before Numitor, the old king who has been living in obscurity since his removal. Numitor notices something: the young man's age, his confidence, the way his presence unsettles the room. Questions follow. Stories are compared. The truth begins to surface. Faustulus, who has long suspected more than he has said, reveals what he knows about the basket and the river. The pieces fall into place. Romulus and Remus learn who they are. Not only shepherds, sons, but heirs, grandsons of a king, children of a woman silenced for political convenience. The discovery does not soften them. It sharpens them. They do not hesitate. They gather supporters. They return to Alba Longa. Amulius is overthrown. Numitor is restored. Order, at least briefly, returns. This moment could serve as an ending. The wrong has been corrected. The rightful ruler is back. The twins could remain. They could inherit. They could settle into the safety of an existing city. But this is not that kind of story. Because Rome is not founded by people who accept ready-made places. It is founded by people who choose to create something new. Romulus and Remus do not stay in Alba Longa. They return to the place that raised them, to the river, to the hills, to the land where they first learned how to live without protection. This choice is critical. It tells us that Rome's origin is not only about legitimacy, it is about preference. The twins prefer the openness of the frontier to the structure of an old dynasty. They prefer the risk of founding to the comfort of inheriting. They carry with them everything the story has layered onto them so far: Trojan ancestry, royal blood, divine association, shepherd upbringing, survival by chance, strength earned in conflict. All of it converges as they stand once more near the river. The same river that was meant to kill them. The same hills that sheltered them. The same landscape that has quietly prepared them for what comes next. Now the question changes. No longer, who are we? But where do we belong? And more dangerously, who decides? The city has not yet been founded. No wall has been traced. No boundary marked. But the conditions are set. 2 brothers. 1 place. 1 decision that cannot be shared. What began as survival is about to become choice. And choice is where Rome's story turns from inheritance to conflict. Standing on the edge of a place that feels familiar can be more dangerous than standing in the unknown. Romulus and Remus return to the hills by the river not as children rescued by chance, but as young men who know who they are. They carry names now. They carry lineage. They carry the quiet authority that comes from having survived what should have ended them. The land greets them the same way it always has. The river moves. The hills rise. The paths wind between them, worn smooth by years of footsteps. But something has changed. They are no longer just part of the landscape. They are looking at it with intent. This is the moment where survival turns into planning. Not planning written down. Not planning debated in assemblies. But the kind of planning that happens when people begin to imagine permanence. The question is no longer where to sleep tonight. It is where to build something that will last. Romulus and Remus agree on one thing easily. This place matters. The river crossing. The hills. The open ground between them. All of it offers the same advantages it always did: visibility, defensibility, access to trade, and space to grow. But agreement ends quickly after that. Because founding a city is not only about choosing a place, it is about choosing authority. And authority cannot be shared forever. Later tradition frames what happens next as a dispute over signs. Which hill should be chosen? Which brother has the favor of the gods? Who has the right to lead? These questions are told through ritual, because ritual is how early societies turn power into something that feels legitimate. The story says that the brothers turned to augury. They watch the sky. They count birds. They wait for meaning to appear in motion. From a modern point of view, this can sound symbolic or even theatrical. But in an ancient context, it makes sense. If you believe that the gods shape the world, then you believe they have opinions. And if they have opinions, you want to know them before you act. Augury is not a performance for an audience. It is a way of asking permission. Remus stations himself on one hill, Romulus on another. The exact hills vary by telling, but the core image remains the same: two brothers, separated by distance, watching the same sky, waiting for different answers. Remus sees birds first. Romulus sees more birds. The disagreement begins immediately. Is priority more important than quantity? Does seeing a sign first outweigh seeing a stronger sign later? Who gets to interpret the meaning? This argument is not about birds. It is about control over interpretation. Who gets to say what the gods want? Who gets to turn a sign into a command? This is one of the most Roman parts of the story, because Rome, later on, will care deeply about who has the authority to interpret law, ritual, and tradition. The founding story plants that concern at the beginning. Romulus claims the stronger sign. He begins to act. He traces a boundary. This act, drawing a line in the soil, is not casual. It is ritualized. The line marks more than space. It marks identity. Inside the line is order. Outside the line is chaos. Inside the line is protection. Outside the line is threat. The boundary says, "This is ours." And more dangerously, it says, "Not everyone is welcome." Remus does not accept this quietly. In some versions, he mocks the boundary. He steps over it. He shows how easy it is to cross. This gesture is small. A step. A laugh. But symbolically, it is enormous. It challenges the idea that a boundary has power. It challenges the idea that Romulus's authority is real. It challenges the idea that this city will be protected by more than force. What happens next is the most famous and most troubling part of Rome's founding story. Romulus kills Remus, sometimes in anger, sometimes in defense of the boundary, sometimes through another's hand. The details shift. The outcome does not. A brother dies at the moment a city is born. This is not softened in the tradition. It is not explained away. It is presented as a cost, a terrible cost. And it is meant to mean something. Rome's origin is not pure. It is not peaceful. It is not built on consensus. It is built on a decision enforced. This does not mean Romans celebrated the killing. It means they refused to pretend it did not matter. By placing violence at the founding, the story teaches a harsh lesson. Boundaries are serious, and order requires enforcement. This idea will echo through Roman history. Law backed by force. Authority backed by punishment. The belief that the city's survival depends on respect for its limits. Once Remus is gone, there is no longer a shared choice. There is only action. Romulus continues the founding. The boundary becomes fixed. The hill becomes central. The space inside the line becomes the city. It is named Rome. The name itself feels inevitable in the story, but names are acts of power. To name something is to claim it. To name a city after yourself is to tie identity to rule. But Romulus does not rule alone in the way later kings will. The early city is small, vulnerable, surrounded by rivals. It needs people. This creates the next problem. How do you populate a new city? You cannot build walls and expect them to matter if no one lives behind them. You cannot defend land without bodies. You cannot trade without hands. Rome, at its founding, is not a magnet for the powerful. It is a risk. So Romulus does something radical. He opens the city. He offers refuge. According to tradition, Rome becomes a place for the unwanted. Runaways, debtors, exiles, men without land, men without status. This is not generosity for its own sake. It is strategy. By welcoming those who have little to lose, Rome gains people who are willing to fight to keep what they gain. The city grows quickly, but unevenly. There is strength, there is energy, and there is imbalance. Because the city is overwhelmingly male. This imbalance creates another crisis. A city without families cannot last. A population without children is a dead end. Romulus attempts diplomacy. He seeks marriage alliances with neighboring communities. They refuse. Rome is new. Rome is rough. Rome is not trusted. Rejection hardens into resentment. And from that resentment comes one of the most infamous episodes in Rome's legendary past. The seizure of the Sabine women. But that story belongs to what follows. For now, the important thing is this. By the end of this moment, Rome exists. Not as a dream, not as a cluster of huts, but as a named, bounded place with a ruler, a population, and enemies. It is born in blood. It is defined by a line. And it begins its life with a lesson that will shape everything after it. That order is fragile. That authority must be asserted. And that the city, once chosen, is valued above every personal tie. The hills have not changed. The river has not changed. But the meaning of the place has. From this point on, nothing that happens here will be small. Every decision will echo. Because Rome has crossed the boundary from place to city. And cities, once born, demand loyalty. Even when the price is unbearable. A city can be born in an instant. But it does not become real until people live inside it. After the boundary is drawn and the name is spoken, Rome enters its most fragile phase. The line in the soil exists, authority exists. But survival is not yet guaranteed. A new settlement is a gamble. Walls, if they exist at all, are low. Homes are simple. Food stores are limited. Enemies are close. And reputation has not yet hardened into fear or respect. Romulus now faces a problem that every founder faces sooner or later. People. A city without people is only an idea. Rome needs bodies to farm, to build, to guard the boundary, to fight when fighting is unavoidable. But Rome is not an old city with inherited families and deep-rooted alliances. It is new. It is untested. And it is led by a man whose rise was violent and recent. So Romulus does not wait for approval. He acts. According to tradition, he establishes a place of refuge, a sanctuary, a space where those who are unwelcome elsewhere can arrive and stay. The story says that Rome opens its gates to men who have nowhere else to go. Runaways, exiles, debtors, men who have broken laws in other communities. men who have no land, no status, no protection. This decision shapes Rome's character more than any ritual, because it defines the city not by purity but by absorption. Rome does not begin as a city of the chosen. It begins as a city of the desperate. This is not presented as moral virtue. It is strategy. A man with nothing to lose will fight harder than a man protecting comfort. A man who is given a place will defend it. A man who is accepted when no one else accepts him becomes loyal. The city grows quickly. Not neatly, not evenly, but rapidly. Huts multiply. Paths widen. The space inside the boundary fills with movement and noise. Rome begins to feel crowded, alive, and unstable. Because there is a problem that cannot be solved by numbers alone. The population is overwhelmingly male. Men can build walls. Men can fight. But a city without families cannot last. Without women, there are no children. Without children, there is no future. Romulus understands this. He attempts diplomacy. He sends envoys to neighboring communities, asking for marriage alliances. This is a normal request in the ancient world. Marriage binds families. Families bind communities. Communities bind peace. But Rome is refused. The reasons are not complicated. Rome is new. Rome is aggressive. Rome is led by a man who killed his brother. No one wants to tie their daughters to a place like that. The refusal is total. And it is humiliating. Humiliation is dangerous for a young city. It hardens attitudes. It narrows options. It pushes leaders toward risk. Romulus chooses risk. He announces a festival, a celebration, games, feasting, and ritual. He invites neighboring peoples to attend. Among them are the Sabines, who live close enough to matter and strong enough to be dangerous. The invitation appears peaceful. There is no reason to refuse it. When the day arrives, the visitors come. They bring families. They bring daughters. They bring trust. And at the height of the festival, Rome acts. The women are seized, taken from their families, carried into the city. The men are driven back. Weapons are raised. Shouts fill the air. What follows is not a celebration. It is chaos. This moment becomes one of the most uncomfortable episodes in Rome's origin story. Later writers struggle with it. Some soften it. Some justify it. Some frame it as necessity. But none deny it. The women are taken. Rome secures wives by force. The city's future is ensured through violence. This does not mean the story expects approval. It expects recognition. Recognition that early Rome believed survival came before morality. That continuity mattered more than consent. That a city willing to do this would be feared. And fear, in a hostile landscape, could keep you alive. The aftermath is tense. The women resist. Their families rage. War follows. The Sabines organize. Battles are fought. The new city is tested immediately. This is not a distant threat. This is an existential one. Rome's walls are barely real. Its fighters are numerous but untrained. Its leader is bold, but the city's survival is uncertain. And then something unexpected happens. The women intervene. They step between armies. They place themselves between fathers and husbands. They speak. They refuse to choose one side. They claim both. They argue that they have become part of Rome, that they have borne children, that they do not want to lose fathers or husbands, that another round of killing will destroy everyone. This moment reframes the violence that came before it, not by erasing it, but by transforming it. The war ends. The communities merge. The Sabines are not destroyed. They are absorbed. Power is shared. Traditions mix. The city expands, not by annihilating its neighbor, but by incorporating it. This pattern becomes central to Rome's identity. Conflict followed by inclusion. Violence followed by integration. Enemies turned into citizens. The city grows stronger because it can swallow what opposes it. Romulus does not rule alone after this. Sabine leaders join governance. The population stabilizes. Families form. Children are born. Rome becomes something new. Not just a band of fighters, but a society. This does not erase the brutality of the beginning. It builds on it. Rome's founding story insists on this uncomfortable truth. Order can grow out of disorder. Unity can grow out of force. A people can emerge from conflict rather than harmony. This belief will shape Roman history for centuries. It will justify expansion. It will excuse conquest. It will celebrate absorption as strength. By the end of this phase, Rome is no longer simply surviving. It is consolidating. It has enemies. It has allies. It has families. And it has a reputation. A place that takes. A place that keeps. A place that does not let go. The hills still stand. The river still flows. But the city now holds more than walls and people. It holds a method. And that method will carry Rome far beyond these hills. Once Rome survives its first great test, it begins to change in a quieter way. The city no longer lives only from moment to moment. It begins to organize itself. This phase of Rome's early life is less dramatic than battles or betrayals, but it is just as important. A settlement can win a war and still disappear. What allows it to endure is structure. Romulus now stands at the head of a city that is larger, more diverse, and more complex than the one he first claimed. There are Latins. There are Sabines. There are people with no clear origin at all. They do not share the same customs. They do not worship in the same way. They do not all obey authority for the same reasons. If Rome is to survive, these differences must be managed. The tradition says that Romulus begins by dividing the population, not to separate them permanently, but to make them governable. He organizes men into groups for military service. He organizes families into larger units. He creates a sense that every man has a place, and that place comes with obligation. This is the seed of Rome's later obsession with duty. To belong to the city is not only to receive protection, it is to owe service. The earliest Roman army, as tradition remembers it, is not a professional force. It is a citizen force. Men fight because the land behind them is theirs. They fight because the boundary protects their families. They fight because losing means losing everything. Military organization and civic identity grow together. You are not just a fighter. You are a member of Rome. At the same time, Romulus is said to create an advisory council. Later generations will call this body the Senate. In its earliest form, it is not a democratic institution. It is a gathering of leading men, elders, heads of families, those with influence, experience, and followers. Their role is not to rule directly. It is to advise, to stabilize, to give continuity beyond a single leader's will. This matters because Rome's founding story does not imagine a city run by impulse alone. Even at the beginning, authority is expected to listen, if not obey. The presence of an advisory body gives Rome a sense of permanence. If one man falls, the city can still speak. Law, in this early phase, is not written. It lives in memory, in custom, in precedent. People remember what was decided before. They remember what was punished. They remember what was tolerated. This shared memory becomes a form of law. Breaking it invites retaliation, both human and divine. Religion, at this stage, is inseparable from governance. Ritual marks time. Ritual marks space. Ritual marks authority. Romulus is remembered not only as a warrior, but as a founder of religious practice. He establishes sacred days, sacred boundaries, sacred roles. The gods are not distant figures. They are present in decisions, in oaths, in the rhythm of the year. To offend them is to risk disaster. This belief reinforces obedience in a world without written codes. Now consider daily life inside early Rome. Houses remain simple. Wood, mud, thatched roofs. But the settlement is denser than before. Paths become streets through repeated use. Open spaces become meeting grounds. Certain hills gain importance. The space between hills becomes shared territory rather than empty ground. Trade increases. Goods move along the river. Salt, animals, tools, and pottery pass through the city. Rome's position at a crossing point makes it difficult to ignore. With trade comes contact. With contact comes tension. Rome does not exist in peace. Small wars continue. Raids, skirmishes, tests of strength. Each conflict teaches Rome something about itself. When it loses, it adapts. When it wins, it absorbs. This pattern hardens into habit. Rome does not seek isolation. It seeks dominance through incorporation. This is why early Rome is remembered as aggressive but flexible. It can fight, but it can also share power when sharing is useful. The Sabine integration becomes a model. Former enemies become part of the city. Their gods are honored. Their leaders are included. Their people become Romans. This is not equality as we would understand it. Status differences remain. Some families carry more weight. Some voices matter more. But the idea that outsiders can become insiders takes root early. This idea will define Rome's expansion centuries later. Now look again at Romulus himself. In tradition, he is not softened by success. He remains forceful, decisive, at times harsh. He enforces law. He punishes defiance. He expects loyalty. The city reflects its founder. Strong, uncompromising, confident in its right to exist. Yet even in the stories, Romulus does not rule forever. Rome's founding narrative does not linger on peaceful old age. It moves toward another transition. Because Rome's identity is not meant to rest on a single man. It is meant to outlast him. As the city stabilizes, attention shifts from survival to continuity. Who will lead next? How will authority be transferred? What happens when the founder is gone? These questions hang over Rome, even as it grows. The city now has structure. It has families. It has shared rituals. It has habits of governance. But it also has a memory of violence at its core. That memory is not forgotten. It becomes part of Rome's self-understanding, a belief that order is earned, that peace must be guarded, that power must be maintained. Rome is no longer an experiment. It is a functioning community, still fragile, still contested, but undeniably real. The hills are no longer just hills. They are districts. The river is no longer just water. it is a lifeline. The boundary is no longer just a line. It is law. And with law comes the final question of the founding age. What becomes of the founder himself? The answer, like Rome's beginning, will not be simple. Every founding story eventually turns toward absence. A city can survive danger. It can survive hunger. It can survive enemies. What it must also survive is the loss of the person who held it together at the beginning. As Rome settles into its first stable rhythm, Romulus begins to change in the stories told about him. He is no longer only the founder who acted. He becomes the figure who must be explained. Because Rome does not imagine its first king fading quietly into old age. It imagines something stranger. According to tradition, Romulus disappears. One moment he is present. The next, he is gone. The scene is set deliberately. An assembly. A gathering of the people. A public moment where authority is visible. The sky darkens. The storm rises. Thunder breaks. Clouds swallow the hill. When the air clears, Romulus is no longer there. No body is found. No grave is marked. The founder of the city has vanished. Later, Romans did not treat this as an accident. They treated it as transformation. Some said Romulus was taken by the gods, lifted from the earth, changed into something more than human. Others whispered darker explanations. That the senators, tired of his authority, killed him. That his disappearance was political. That the storm was convenient. The tradition does not force a single answer. It allows both. Because Rome understood something important about power. A founder is useful, but a permanent founder is dangerous. If Romulus became a god, his authority could no longer be challenged. If Romulus was killed, authority returned to the community. Both versions serve Rome. In the divine version, Rome gains a protector. Romulus becomes Quirinus, a god associated with the Roman people as a collective. Not a god of lightning or oceans, but a god of citizens, of unity, of the city itself. In this telling, Rome does not lose its founder. It absorbs him. He becomes part of the sacred order, watching over the city he began. In the political version, Rome sheds its founder. The city proves that it does not belong to one man, that authority can change hands, that even the first king is not above removal. This idea will echo loudly in Roman history. Kings will fall. Power will be shared. Institutions will outlast individuals. Either way, the result is the same. Rome continues. Leadership passes to others. The city does not collapse. It adapts. This is the final test of the founding age. Not whether a city can be created, but whether it can endure separation from its creator. After Romulus, Rome remembers its beginning with care. It preserves rituals tied to the founder. It names places after him. It marks time according to his acts. But it also moves forward. The founding age closes. The age of kings continues. And beyond that, centuries later, Rome will look back and tell these stories again. Not because they are neat, but because they explain how Romans understood themselves. A people born from survival, from conflict, from absorption, from order imposed and order accepted. The founding of Rome, as Romans remembered it, is not a fairy tale. It is not gentle. It is not clean. It insists that greatness comes at a cost, that unity can require sacrifice, that law is stronger than blood, that the city is greater than the individual. By ending the story with disappearance rather than death, Rome leaves its origin open. Open to interpretation, open to use, open to memory, and that openness is part of its strength. because every generation can return to the beginning and find what it needs. A warning, a justification, a lesson, or a reminder that Rome, from its first moment, was built to last longer than anyone who shaped it. The river continues to flow. The hills continue to rise. And the city, once named, continues beyond its founder. This is how Rome ends its beginning. Not with an ending, but with endurance. When Romans looked back on their beginning, they did not see a single moment frozen in time. They saw a pattern, a way of becoming. By the end of the founding age, Rome is no longer defined by one man, one act, or one generation. It is defined by habits that have already hardened into tradition. This is where the founding story stops being only about Romulus and Remus and becomes about Rome itself. This city that emerges from the legends has several traits that Romans will recognize as permanent. First, Rome understands itself as a place shaped by outsiders. It is not born from one people alone. It grows by taking in others. Runaways, enemies, neighbors, former rivals. This is not accidental. It is structural. From the refuge of the earliest days to the integration of the Sabines, Rome learns that expansion does not always require destruction. Absorption can be just as powerful. This belief will guide Roman policy for centuries. Cities will be defeated and then rebuilt as Roman. Peoples will be conquered and then enrolled. Identity will be flexible, so long as loyalty is firm. Second, Rome understands that order is not natural. It must be created, maintained, enforced. The boundary drawn by Romulus becomes more than a line, it becomes a principle. Laws matter. Limits matter. Crossing them has consequences. This idea grows into Rome's legal culture, its discipline, and its insistence that stability is worth sacrifice. Third, Rome understands power as something larger than individuals. Even its founder does not remain. Authority passes. Institutions endure. This prepares Rome for a future without kings, and later for a republic built on offices rather than personalities. The founding story quietly teaches Romans that removing a ruler does not mean destroying the state. That lesson will return again and again. Fourth, Rome ties its identity to ritual and memory. The founding is remembered through festivals, through sacred days, through places that remain charged with meaning. Ritual does what walls cannot. It binds generations who never meet. It turns memory into obligation. This is how Rome keeps its beginning alive without being trapped by it. Now, step back from the legends and look at what likely happened. Not in detail. Not with names, but in shape. Small settlements on hills gradually connected. Shared spaces formed. Water was managed. Trade increased. Conflicts occurred. Some groups dominated. Others were absorbed. Over time, a central place emerged. A place with enough people, organization, and advantage to outlast its neighbors. The legends compress this process into a human story. Brothers instead of generations. A boundary instead of gradual expansion. A single founder instead of many leaders. This compression is not deception. It is memory simplified. And for the Romans, it worked. Because the founding story was never meant to satisfy modern curiosity. It was meant to teach. It taught Romans why they valued discipline, why they respected law, why they believed in expansion, why they accepted hierarchy, why they thought survival justified harsh choices, and why the city always came first. This is why Rome's origin story remained useful long after Rome itself had changed. Kings gave way to consuls. Republic gave way to empire. Emperors rose and fell. But the founding story remained. It could justify power. It could warn against excess. It could remind citizens that Rome was built in danger and must be defended with seriousness. In the end, the founding of Rome is not a promise of peace. It is a statement of endurance, that a city can be born from violence and still create order, that a people can come from many origins and still call themselves one, that memory, shaped carefully, can become a foundation as strong as stone. The river where the twins were cast out continues to flow. The hills where huts once stood continue to rise above the plain. The boundary that began as a ritual line becomes a world-spanning idea. Rome's beginning does not fade because it was never only about the past. It was about how to face the future. And that is why, even after centuries of change, Romans could still look back to the founding and see themselves reflected there. Not as they were, but as they believed they needed to be. This is the legacy of Rome's beginning. Not a single story, but a way of understanding power, survival, and belonging. And it is why the founding of Rome remained alive long after the people who first told it were gone. If you enjoyed this journey into Rome's earliest days, subscribe for more long-form stories from the ancient world, where history and myth meet in the quiet hours. And if you'd like to support the channel, simply let the next story play or leave a comment to help others find their way here. Until next time, rest well